Hey students, we're starting a new series this week called Worlds Apart. And we're going to be talking about science and faith and trying to determine if the two can coexist. Because the reality is, science and faith can seem like worlds apart. Maybe you've sat in your science class and you've learned about life, humanity, or the earth, and you started to get more questions than answers regarding your faith. So maybe the big question we're all thinking is, can you believe in science while still having faith in God? Sometimes it feels that science and faith are worlds apart. We have science over here and faith in God over here, and there's this tension between the two, and they're pulling each other apart. So it feels like they can't coexist, and maybe at times it feels like we have to choose between science or faith in God. It hasn't always been this way. In fact, some of the greatest scientists ever known did not have to choose between the two. Copernicus studied the stars and the universe. He was the first person to recognize that the earth revolves around the sun instead of the assumption that the sun and the planets revolve around the earth. And Copernicus was a Christ follower. Then we have Galileo. Galileo made even more discoveries. He is known as the father of science. And Galileo, also a Christ follower. Sir Isaac Newton was responsible for all those laws of physics that you still learn today in your classes. And Sir Isaac also believed in God. The pattern here is that these incredibly intelligent scientists came to the realization through their research and discoveries that there must be a master creator. They didn't seem to have to choose between their belief in science and belief in God. So why does it feel like today that we must make that choice sometimes? For some reason, we feel this tension now, that if we believe in God, we must be afraid of science, or that science is too rational to line up with a faith in an invisible God. But what if it doesn't have to be this way? What if science and faith in God aren't worlds apart? What if we could use science to prove that there is a master creator? What if you could use science to grow your faith in God? Students, I couldn't possibly begin to answer all of your questions, but what I want to focus on today is to try to shift your perspective. And here's what I want you to think about. Science is about how things work and function. Faith is all about understanding who was behind it all. When we begin to look at science and faith like this, we see that they're actually connected. They aren't worlds apart. Copernicus, Galileo, and Newton didn't have to choose between the two. And guess what? Neither do you. Students, as we begin this series on the relationship between science and faith, we need to look at the who behind everything. And this is the exact place where the Bible begins. The Bible is filled with historical stories and personal experiences of people who believed in God. And the first 5 books are the story of God's people. And those 5 books were written by a man named Moses. And at the very beginning of this story, in Genesis 1:1, it says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." Here's what I want you to see. In the very beginning, God created the heavens and the earth and everything we know. This first sentence in the Bible is there to remind us that this was no accident, that there is a God who set all of creation into motion. The beginning of the Bible is more about who created everything than how everything was created. What if the purpose of science is to show us how the who put everything together? What if God and science don't have to be worlds apart? What if the story of creation was there to show us how science explains that everything wasn't by chance, but by design? Did you know that Earth is in the perfect spot in our solar system for life to exist? Earth is rotating at just the right speed and revolving at the right velocity around the sun for gravity to stay in place. Earth is also at just the right distance from the sun that allows for liquid water to exist. If any of these things were to change slightly, life as we know it would cease to exist. Maybe this was the perfect accident, but if I'm being honest, I don't buy it. I don't see how the perfect placement of the earth just happened by some random chance. And that's how I feel about the rest of creation. That's what I love about Genesis and the beginning of the Bible. It confirms what I was already suspecting. Creation isn't random. There's a who behind our existence, and you can believe in God while still exploring the how that science explains. Science and faith actually build each other up. And here's what I want you to remember. Your faith can actually grow as you explore science. Now I realize that this might be a different approach than what you've thought about before. Maybe you grew up thinking that your faith in God meant that you had to ignore or discredit science. Maybe you even thought that they were worlds apart and couldn't coexist. Here's what I want you to understand. When you learn about the how, remember the who. As you sit in your science class and you're learning about how the intricacies of the universe works, remember who was behind it all and praise him for his work. Trust me, this will change the way you feel about science and will even change the way you feel about God. And maybe you hate science, and that was me too growing up. I hated science, and I did not understand why I had to take it. And that may come as a surprise to some of you, since I might have been your science teacher. When I was first offered the science position at LJI, I wasn't that excited about it. As I began to research and look at the curriculum, I began to see the who behind the how, and my faith grew immensely. I was amazed by God's power and creativity in all of creation. My faith in God grew as I explored science, and yours can too. When you start to do this, you may become captivated by God's love and creativity too. And as you begin to explore science with this belief that God is behind creation, then your response can be, so that's how he did it. Your faith can actually grow as you explore science, and this means that faith and science don't have to be worlds apart. Tomorrow, as you go back to school and you go to your science classes, I want you to view science and faith in God as two things that are connected, not worlds apart. And as you learn about the how, remember the who. And students, remember this: your faith can actually grow as you explore science.